Welcome to today's AJC Berlin online event, Congressional Democrats, the White House, and Europe in 2021. With the US election only 2 weeks away and more than 27 million ballots already cast, we are very pleased to have with us Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur, Democrat from Ohio's 9th District. A member of the Congressional Study Group on Germany, Representative Kaptur is currently the longest-serving woman in the history of the US House of Representatives. She is a member of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, as well as a member of the Caucus on Central and Eastern Europe. Today's discussion will be moderated by AJC Berlin Director Remco Liemhuis. After we hear from our esteemed guest, we will open up the questioning from the public. You may submit your questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen.
Thank you, Eric, and good morning to everybody watching from the United States. Good afternoon to everyone tuning in from Europe. Representative Kaptur, first, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule this close to the presidential election. As you know, we at AJC are deeply committed to the transatlantic relationship and the liberal world order that was built after the Second World War and the horrors of the Holocaust. It is not a secret, though, that the transatlantic relations have been strained over the last years. With the election only 2 weeks away, what would you tell your counterparts in the Bundestag, as well as the German public right now, about the current state of the transatlantic relations? And what in your assessment, would change with the Biden presidency?
Well, first of all, thank you so very much again, Doctor, as well as the American Jewish Committee for hosting this event at a very, very consequential moment for Liberties Alliance. As you know, unlike most parliaments, we here in the United States have a constitution that has 3 co-equal branches of government. So even though we have an executive branch, which is the second branch that is outlined in our Constitution, our first branch is the Congress of the United States, and we are a co-equal branch. And I think if you look, at both the Senate and the House, we have very broad bipartisan support for undergirding our precious relationships with the Transatlantic Alliance, with funding NATO. Our Defense Committee certainly have that posture. I serve on one of those. And so people should watch the interplay in the United States between the various branches of government. The Supreme Court doesn't get that involved, but in terms of funding and in terms of, for instance, the US Congress Bundestag exchange, we work with the German Bundestag on that. We look for ways to maintain a close contact. I was in Germany, actually, I think my last trip abroad was to Germany to take a look at some of our forces. We were in Grafenwohr, and we just had a very enlightening presentation. Several of us from our defense committees went on that trip together. So do not assume that because the President of the United States says something or acts in a way that's counterproductive, that there won't be a check that comes from the legislative branch of the government. And that has been happening. I hope that there will be a change. It's no secret I'm a Democrat, so I hope there'll be a change in a few months on the executive side. I have never seen a president of the United States behave as he has toward Europe, toward Germany, in particular, toward the leader of Germany, your chancellor. I'm appalled. I've said that in a couple audiences, and I'm sure I've gotten some negative mail on that, but the vast majority of people are supportive of this precious alliance that transcends any particular subject, but encompasses our shared history. We have farmers here in my region who emigrated from Germany. We have business relationships in the glass industry, for example. These have existed long before any president assumed office. There are religious ties of various sects and denominations and faith groups that transcend borders. Many of us were in office when the Berlin Wall came down. And I have a piece of that in my office here. In my district, I display it on the wall so the younger generations can come to understand what actually happened. And we have to work hard in our country to educate the aspiring generations as to the history of Europe. We have scholarship. For example, Dr. Timothy Snyder has written the book Bloodlands, and just extraordinary work on the history of Europe that is widely read and used in our country and in other countries around the world. So I think our academic, economic, political, military exchanges with Germany and our partners in the region are very important. And each of us who serves in Congress has constituents. We have men in corps, son in corps. We have individuals who travel there, enrichment programs of different kinds, and many people of German heritage here in the United States. So it's fundamental to who we are as a people and how we relate to Germany. And so I guess as my first major was history, I think I have maybe a longer arc of view, and what we're seeing now is an exception that will be moved aside very soon. I would urge people, and this may be too political to say, but if any of your listeners have relationships with businesses, religious organizations, cultural, fraternal groups, this is a good time to share with them, if they're here in the United States, if you have fraternal relationships of different kinds, how important this transatlantic relationship is. And that Americans must vote, not just for their own pecuniary self-interest, but whether it's taming COVID or whether it is maintaining a strong military posture on the European continent, that we share those goals, and that the American people have to not be one-issue voters. They have to think about the state of the world and our roles together in preserving Liberty's alliance. So I would just encourage them to, use the last couple of weeks here to re-energize those relationships and urge folks to vote in the interests of liberty.
Thank you. And just circling back, so what change would we see if Joe Biden would be elected president? What in your assessment?
There wouldn't be any confusion or doubt about how strongly the United States of America supports the transatlantic alliance and NATO. Joe Biden has probably traveled more to Europe than any sitting member of the Congress of the United States. He was a leading member of the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate, and he understands the history of the 20th century. He hasn't forgotten it or never learned it. He lived part of it. And so it is part of his fiber. I think he would appoint outstanding ambassadors. I think that he would play a role. He needs no training wheels. He needs no coaching. He has his own views of how critical these relationships are. And and he has a good sense of the various religious layers in Europe and what has happened historically. And he respects the sacrifice. He values that. It's part of who he is. It's part of his DNA. It's part of his being. So I think his top advisors, the people that he will appoint, whether it's to the Department of Defense, whether it's some of his closest advisors on the National Security Council, he knows in his mind, he knows who those already are. He's ready to go. And I think that Europe should be, Greater Europe, Germany, Greater Europe should be confident that he would be a strong leader. And he will have many members of Congress who will support him. We won't have this dissonance between the executive and the legislative branches, which is what we have now.
Thank you. So you already touched upon the fact that a lot of people here in Germany and in Europe have questions about America's commitment to European security. So, but equally, there are also questions about Germany's and Europe's commitment to providing for their own security and to the transatlantic alliance. So what is your take on this? Because we're talking a lot about the current administration, but there are questions regarding Germany, especially Germany, as Europe's biggest economy, in terms of burden sharing in the alliance.
Well, obviously, I share the idea that at least 2% of budget should be dedicated to defense. That doesn't happen overnight. I think the President of the United States could have achieved that without all of the rancor and the public embarrassment, and really giving our enemies, I don't just view them as competitors, but enemies of liberty, succor, giving them a bone to, oh, well, look at that. You know, they're criticizing, trying to weaken the Western alliance. And I thought the president did it in a very destructive manner. So, but this is the 21st century, and we have to figure how we are going to defend the alliance, and countries are going to have to measure up. We see great progress. I mean, there's movement in that direction. Some countries have already exceeded their threshold, and Germany certainly is moving toward that. We'd like to see progress along those lines. We'd like to see shared commitments on the military front, the development of technologies, the deployment of technologies. There are joint training exercises, which I saw myself. And so I think that there are many roads for cooperation. I think President Joe Biden will appoint individuals in the military who will lead those efforts for our country, working with the countries of Europe, starting with Germany. And I want to thank Germany for hosting so many of our hospitals and medical facilities, for instance, at Landstuhl, and the various key installations that we have in order to heal. We can have greater cooperation on the medical front, for example, just as another dimension of what is done. So I think that there will be, diplomacy will come back and not bullying. And that will be very much a part of, I think, a Biden approach. And we in the Congress will welcome that fully.
So you already talked, so we talked about NATO and the 2% goal, but obviously there are also other questions and other challenges to the West, to Europe, to the United States, namely Russia and China. Both countries are seeking to make inroads into Europe. Russia with Nord Stream 2, China through technology and 5G. How will Democrats in Congress work with the White House to ensure that Europe and the US remain on the same page when it comes to such project closely linked to our security, to the security of the United States, to the security of Europe? What is your personal take on these issues? And again, how will the Biden administration differ from the current administration regarding Nord Stream 2 and 5G?
I think that, and I haven't talked with the vice president about this, but I think he would be concerned about Nord Stream 2. I am deeply concerned about that. One of my goals in the Congress is to try to help Europe be self-sufficient, try to help. We're here in our country trying to be self-sufficient in terms of energy production. I actually worked for President Jimmy Carter many years ago when our country was completely dependent on imported oil. And it so damaged our economy. It just, and our politics, our international relations. We paid a heavy price for that dependency. We have dug out of that. We're about 90% independent now in terms of our energy production, and we are investing an enormous amount in order to invent the future of energy production that is carbon neutral. We would love to work more with Germany on that for the sake of the world, not just for the sake of our respective countries. And I expect with German engineering genius and scientific genius that there are ideas to be born that are being developed now that we could hasten. Right now we're into, here in our country, electric car, electric power generation, but beyond that is hydrogen. And there is small scale nuclear. And there are other horizons as well. I won't go into all of them. I chair one of our committees that deal with energy. But I would love to have more robust relations with Germany in these arenas, because she cannot become dependent. Europe cannot be dependent on Russian supply lines. That'll be like the United States was dependent on the Middle East back in the 1970s, and we paid a big price for that. So I would like to find a way to work on energy conservation and efficiency with interests in Germany, and to see if there isn't a way. I know Germany's done a lot with solar and renewables. That's not enough, but it's a good head start. And the world is transforming, and for the sake of our world, the world needs the democratic nations of the earth to come together and provide leadership for the sake of all. It's the 21st century is going to demand great science and great deployment of that science in order that all people can live with a greater certainty that we can either capture carbon and not generate it in the first place. And I would expect that the Democratic Alliance of our respective continents could play a really big role in that. And I will welcome that opportunity. And I know Joe Biden will.
So what would you tell, just circling back, what would you tell Germans? Because in Germany, we see often the argument is being made that the US is blocking Nord Stream 2 or is against Nord Stream 2 because they want to sell their gas in Germany. What is your response to that idea?
My response is, do not become beholden to dictatorships and political systems that do not have your best long-term interests at heart. We in this country know what that feels like when prices quadrupled overnight and our economy was thrown into havoc. It's happened more than once. And the current economic situation that we face is due to the pandemic. But we have to have energy systems that are not subject to manipulation. And this is something that's hidden often. People don't think about that, but whoever controls the spigot, whatever that spigot is, they control your country. They can control the economy of your country. So you have to be very, very judicious, have multiple supply lines. I hope the United States can be one of the suppliers to Germany, but it shouldn't be the only one. There should be various technologies, and there should be various solutions for different parts of Germany, depending on their remoteness, depending on how heavily industrial they are. I'm trying to figure out a way to reduce the power bills of our big industrial producers by 1/3. And what we can do to make it more efficient for the advanced industrial economies like Germany's and ours to provide heavy industry, which is essential to our defense, for example, with a better power platform. And I'm looking forward to the opportunity to working together on that with the new Biden administration.
And while we're talking about Russia, please, maybe you allow me one follow-up question. We have seen the poisoning of Alexei Navalny recently. We have seen the incursion and the invasion of Ukraine, and all the other incidents that happened coming from Moscow. What is your wish, or what do you think, how Germany, how Europe and the US should respond to this Russian aggression?
Well, first of all, let me compliment the leaders of Germany for their dispatch in bringing Mr. Navalny out of Russia. The world saw that. I think I was so proud of Germany. I don't know how you did it. I was applauding in my office, and it gave me a great boost. I mean, we all need encouragement in our work, right? And I was just so taken with that moment and with the doctors who were present. And it's another example of Russia's brutal practices that have never ceased. They have never ceased. And even our own president now holding up a fist, at his rallies. I keep going, where is this? what's in his head? How can he even do this in the world that we have grown out of, the world that we know that isn't the type of leadership that liberty-loving people should provide. So my greatest compliments to your government, to all those non-governmental organizations that participated in bringing Mr. Navalny out. In terms of Ukraine, I co-chair and help found the Ukraine caucus in the Congress of the United States. And we have now lost over 12,000, it's probably closer to 14,000 now, Ukrainians in this undeclared war on Ukraine by Russia. Is very, very troubling. And I look to Germany as one of the nations that can help us eventually create a, not just a ceasefire, but a peace on the eastern end of Europe. Ukraine wants to access West, and she should be allowed to access West for her economy, for her scholarship, for so many. Ukraine is a very diverse country, people of many faith groups, and I think the third largest Jewish population in the world, but also various Christian denominations, Muslim. It is a very diverse country, and it is not narrow in its thinking. And it would be much more comfortable as part of the Western alliance than where it is, what is being threatened now by Russia's invasion. So I would hope that Germany and our greater European allies would look for many ways to connect to Ukraine now. Number one, the treatment of veterans who have been fighting. They need more medical care. We have funded a facility at Yavoriv in Ukraine, and I think medical help of various kinds right now is at the top of my list for those who are fighting. The cooperation in exercises so that battalion leaders and unit leaders know what to do. Cooperative military arrangements, very, very important. The help to the people of Ukraine relative to COVID, the government was not very effective in helping people to avoid contracting the virus. And there are needs there, so on the medical side. And then through the magic of the internet, just to keep the social media active, keep it going, keep communication with university people, with publications in Ukraine, with non-governmental organizations, with religious organizations that exist in Ukraine and are trying to minister to the people, kind of adopt part of Ukraine, a town in Ukraine or a oblast in Ukraine, kind of find a way to keep them connected, because they truly, they are under siege. And it's not just on the eastern edge, but the infiltration of their government with operatives at every level. And so they are at the cutting edge. I call it the scrimmage line for liberty in Europe today.
Thank you. And what about the challenges that are posed to the West by China, and especially 5G? And what is your advice, and what would you like to see in terms of a response, of a collective response of the West towards these issues, and especially when it comes to 5G and this critical infrastructure, and how should the West, Europe and the United States push back on this influence coming from Beijing?
Yes, well, I think that we have to, as a Congress, work with our own government and with our allies to any technology, any effort that would create a form of hybrid warfare inside our systems. And I view some of what China is doing as very destructive. Literally, in the private sector, everybody knows this, our companies are hacked thousands of times a month for technology. So we need to be prepared on the digital front to fend off Chinese aggression and, frankly, Russian aggression in this sphere. So this goes back to my point about relationships in engineering, in academia, in our highest research institutes, in the military, to try to fend off. And unfortunately, what China does is it steals the technology and then manufactures it in one of its state-run enterprises and dumps product around the world. So they both try to create havoc inside of our military systems through hacking and so forth, and then steal our private technology. So they're very, very active, and they are not a friendly player. They don't believe in democracy. They don't believe in the right to vote, the right to the free practice of religion, free speech. I mean, it's a different world there. And so we are allies. Our NATO alliance, our transatlantic alliance is the bulwark. It has been the bulwark since World War II to protect the combination of democracies around the world that care very much about human rights and about the rights of all people to be equal and to have their rights protected under the law through a rule of law, not just a dictator's wishes. And all that is at risk, and it's not something that will be solved, addressed in a year. This is a lifetime commitment. This is an intergenerational commitment that we have to keep in place. And I have to say, and of course I'm a Democrat, but in terms of Donald Trump, I think that he has weakened the alliance. I think that he, from the executive side, has not done what he could have done as president of the United States. And embarrassing our allies, behaving in a manner that met with dictators publicly, put them on the stage with the American flag, and then berated the leaders of democracies, countries that have a rule of law. I've never seen anything like it. And that's why I'm working so hard, I can say this openly, to defeat him. Because to me, liberty is most important. Without it, nothing else works.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you've already mentioned social media, and so the mainstreaming of extreme political movements and conspiracy theories through social media platforms have shaken the fundamentals of our democratic institutions and our values. How can the United States and Europe legislate to counter online and offline transnational networks that spread disinformation, hatred, and divide our societies?
There's an expression, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And I think what we have to do, we have to check what is happening and try to elevate the truth as opposed to concoctions and falsehoods that have become so much a part of the virtual world. And I think in this 21st century, we're going to have to adjust to that in a new way that the 20th century never did. And so though the social media has a great deal of power, it also is not real. It can distort, it can create falsehood overnight, and we're seeing our enemies use those platforms to create images in people's heads that really aren't true. And so it's going to require a great deal of creative energy. And I think it's going to require some regulation of some of these companies that allow literally crime to occur on these platforms. And we're just at the beginning of this new age. So that is why it's so important for us to work together to develop the platforms and to hold irresponsible parties accountable. And I think it will probably require some additional laws being passed. This has developed so quickly that it's as though the law is following the development of the technology. At some point, it will catch up. And we have to be committed to that. But the virtual world, all I say to the young people that I address many times, the virtual world is not real. Just remember, you have to be very discerning. It's going to require a better level of education and for people to understand how to discover truth. And it's going to require counter presentations, right? To try to level the playing field in this.
While it is not the reality, it sometimes spills over into reality. What happens on these platforms?
Yes.
This is
Yes.
I mean, this is something that we're seeing in Europe. It's very concerning that even though it is online, it's not staying online. And we had racist terror attacks, anti-Semitic terror attacks here, by people who got radicalized through the internet. So this is why we also agree that we need to be vigilant there in the online
Remco,
domain.
here in our country, I can tell you that one of the terrible incidents we had occur, what hasn't happened yet is our law enforcement officials, once they understand what happened on a website, let's say, they aren't coming back to the public and saying, this is how the individual actually got engaged with that group. Then this is what happened. This is how they planned the attack. There's silence. And I think it's because the law enforcement officials are still trying to unload phones and do a lot of things, but there has to be some way of going back to the public and explaining what happened so they better understand what is going on and how they are being used. But I found law enforcement following in the wake. They're not able to go back. Even sometimes when I request, what can you say publicly? They're still investigating. It's so new that they are still trying to discern the truth. And I think they're holding some of this information closely. And I do think public education has to occur at some point.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we obviously applauded Facebook's decision and Twitter's decision last week to ban Holocaust denial from their platform as a first positive step in countering disinformation. And I guess you know that in Germany it is a crime since the founding of the republic. So we obviously applaud that they've taken this decisive step and finally are taking down Holocaust denial. But I guess it will not end there. So thank you very much. I'm now turning over to Eric, who has questions from our listeners or people who are watching us. And Eric?
Yes, thank you to our listeners for your questions. As a reminder, you can still submit questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Our first question: President Trump has sought to capitalize on isolationist tendencies that are especially present during times of crisis, perhaps more successfully in America's so-called heartland than on its coasts. How do you evaluate the attitude with your own constituency towards the transatlantic partnership, and what are the main factors that will influence their attitude in the years to come?
Well, I represent first of all, a very good question. And in my part of the United States, we have large numbers of our people that have served in the U.S. military. We don't have big bases here. We do have some military installations, but we've had a number of families that have served around the world and many who fought in World War II, and their children and grandchildren remember. They remember the sacrifice. And I think it's important for Europeans to know that for the United States, it is very important to find ways to celebrate the victory of liberty over tyranny and to help to educate the next generation as they lose touch with what happened in the 20th century. So there's a big education job to be done on that front. And I don't think we're doing an adequate job there. So people can be fed false information and believe it. First of all, we've had military service. Number two, the people who came to the region that I represent came from all over the world. We're a port city, we're a railroad center. People settled here from large numbers from Europe. And so there's a family heritage. I would really encourage Europeans from the various countries of Europe to continue to build ties back to those families of immigrants. If you come to Cleveland, Ohio, one of the cities that I'm privileged to represent, there is a boulevard, Martin Luther King Boulevard, that is like no other boulevard in the world. It is, they have a cultural gardens where beautiful, beautiful replicas of various ethnic groups, various nationality groups are able to express themselves. So for example, the Albanians, there was a huge Albanian migration to Cleveland, Ohio, and I represent many of them. Well, they picked Mother Teresa, all right? So they raised the money and they installed the statue of Mother Teresa. But to me, that boulevard is so expressive of the respect that the people of our region have for various ethnic, racial, religious denominations that make us up. And it doesn't get any attention. It's so interesting to me that Rick Steves, that famous broadcaster, he should come there and he should work with the Europeans, and we should talk about our shared heritage. We should talk about what was happening in Europe. We should talk about the settlement of America. In New York, there is the Ellis Island, where a lot of immigrants came. There were other places through which immigrants entered our country. I think creating linkages to those organizations is really very, very important. For those who were trafficked as slaves early on, before my relatives ever got here, that story is just coming forward. And I think we have to be honest. Politics has matured in many countries. I think we have to understand that heritage for religious discrimination that occurred. Why? Why did that happen? And we need to educate around that. So there are so many grand universities in Europe. There are so many broadcast networks. There are so many cultural affinities. Right now, one of the signs that people are interested in reconnecting is this search for your genetic code, right? Your DNA. They're sending their DNA to figure out where did they come from. They're trying to figure out family heritage. I think we build on those movements and families' interest in what really happened before I got here, and approach them personally. Find ways to help people discover their own heritage. I think that would be so important. And we have some places in America, I guess, where people feel, you know, America first, and obviously President Trump feeds that. But honestly, that's not America. We're an immigrant country. That is, we are not an isolationist country, and but we strengthen that knowledge by helping families through teachers, through educational programs, help people discover their own history.
Thank you. And turning now to the very near future about the election, the validity of the election's results has already been thrown into doubt, and a commitment to the peaceful transfer of power has not been guaranteed. What should Germans and Europeans be on the lookout for on election night? And is there any role for the international community to play to make sure that elections are free, fair, and secure?
Well, I have never lived through an election where the results were in doubt. And I've lived through a lot of elections. We know that some of the votes will not be counted, that some of them will still be coming in some of the states. And the various major political parties have batteries of attorneys working in all of the states to assure a fair count. And I'm hoping that our system will function. We have our civil laws, and if there are organizations that try to disrupt in any way, the law will be enforced. I have no doubt about that. It will be enforced by local governments, by state, and I don't think the federal government will be necessary, but you don't know. But I expect that based on the numbers that I'm seeing, that the counts will be fair. And yes, there's been some attempt to rig voting in some of the states. For example, in my own state, providing 2 boxes in counties where people can actually deposit votes. Whether you have a county of 2 million people or 20,000 people, they give each county two boxes, and they create long lines purposely. People are waiting in lines right now, 2 hours sometimes, to vote. And so there have been a lot of, I call them tricks, that the opposition has put forward to suppress the vote. But there are concurrent efforts to encourage people to stick it out and to vote. The numbers are astounding. The number of absentee ballots that have been filed already, people voting early, it's at historic highs. So I'm hoping that the American people will respond. I have a lot of confidence in the American people, and we can make mistakes. Democracies can make mistakes. The question is, can we recover from those? And can we put together a government that can really function on behalf of everyone, dedicated to our most fundamental values of liberty for all, justice for all, equality for all. And I think the American people are going to come through. I really do. And there may be some hanky-panky, there may be some problems in some places, but I don't think it will be all, and we'll figure it out. So I'm fairly confident.
Thank you. So if there was one thing you would ask of German civil society, regardless of the election's outcome, on the day after the election, from civil society to the highest level, what would you ask the Germans to do to help improve transatlantic relations?
I would say make a very strong effort to connect to the institutions and people in the United States that you are closest to. Whatever those might be, find a way to cement those relations. It's difficult for travel now because of the pandemic, but I would try to communicate virtually. I would find ways to provide content for historical programs in schools. I would find ways to connect to families, to organizations that are functioning in our country that have a German heritage. I would look to strengthen those relationships. On the business side, I mean, they're phenomenal, the relationships there. But find ways that those companies can be more effective in the United States to strengthen our shared interests. And I would probably strengthen the Congressional Bundestag exchange program. I think that would be very important. Any religious group or coalition of religious organizations could produce historical content to talk about what happened in Europe, how the nations of Europe built forward, and how we are part of this web of liberty-loving countries around the world, and who our enemies are. I think there's great opportunity for filmmakers, for producers of content to rise to this occasion of the paradigm of the 21st century, and kind of building on what we inherited and now moving forward with some of the new challenges are. I think the German people, I mean, you're just so talented in so many ways that it's really unlimited. And I wouldn't just do academic relationships at the highest level of universities. I would involve them, but look for ways for, in the automotive sector, for cooperation on the vehicles of the future. That's already happening in ways that I don't even know. Building materials and ways of thinking about powering the world in the 21st century, a world that should be liberty loving and not built on repression as the first order of business. And so I think you need to think about reconnecting with interests in the United States and enrich that dialogue across many sectors. I hope that helps.
Well, I mean, this requires that we get out of this pandemic so that we can all travel again. And we, as AJC, bring people to the United States from Germany and people from the US to Germany to do exactly what you described, people to people connection. And what you said at the beginning is something that we also think is true, that that this relationship is fundamentally more than one chancellor, one president, that this is a deeper relationship based on values and our democratic values. And so, Congresswoman, thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you very much for that reassuring message from Ohio. And I know you're terribly busy right now, and I hope that we will be able to meet here in Berlin as soon as circumstances allow, and that we can work on these issues together. And also on behalf of AJC, thank you very much for everything that you're doing in terms of preserving our transatlantic relationship, strengthening it, and we are the same team here. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Remco. Thank the organizations that are listening in Germany, and thank you for your astounding leadership. It's always a pleasure to work with you.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too.